Hello and welcome back to the All Out Brits Podcast, the podcast where we send the house on all things NFL from the across the seas here in sunny old Manchester, and we talk all things NFL this week. And it's been a week as always where it's been interesting. This week we had more injuries than we had Eagles touchdowns, and we had a lot more security ejections than we did Josh Allen INTs, which was quite a surprise. But it's something that we'll talk about, and we'll talk about in the wonderful company of Mr. Elliot Greenwood. Mr. Elliot Greenwood, how are you doing this week?
I am doing, as always, sir, when I speak to you, I am doing absolutely wonderful. You mentioned this week has been a very, very exciting week. I think it's been a week full of shocks, a week full of surprises, twists and turns. But once again, we're here to talk about it, and I cannot wait. Sir.
We are indeed. And as always, as people probably wouldn't expect, unless they've listened to a few now, we're going to kick off in 2-minute drill. We're going to get it all talked about. We're going to go through all the games that have happened this week, all the action, all the absolute catastrophes, all in 2 minutes, quick and fast, to get you up to date with everything that went on this week in the NFL. So, Mr. Elliot Greenwood, are you ready to take the snap?
As my favourite quarterback in the NFL would say, here we go, sir. Let's have it. I'm ready when you are.
Okay. 180. Here we go. 180 set.
Right, there we go. Cowboys versus the Hawks starting us off. Cowboys moved to 9-3. Dak Prescott was elite. 3 touchdowns for him and touching 300 yards on the day. Moving on, Titans versus the Colts. Colts do the business in OT. But for the Titans, Derrick Henry on your bench this week in Fantasy Taz. Not a good move. 102 yards and 2 tutties for him. Jets versus the Falcons. After Bijan Robinson's 27-point performance last week, we got absolutely blue-balled by Arthur Smith. He did nothing on the game. Falcons do win over the Jets. Saints versus the Lions. That was the most Lions game ever. 21 points up in the first quarter, and then they absolutely apple crumbled. They were just, I don't know what went on. They just went shocking. One thing I will say, Sam Laporte had a day, and your man Taz, Taysom Hill, decided to show up. He decided to do something for a change, and that's what we wanted to see. Texans versus the Broncos. Russell Wilson cost his team that game. 3 interceptions for him, including one on the last play of the game. The better QB won them the game. Collins 191 yards. Absolute day for him. Patriots versus the Chargers. No. We'll move on. That is shocking. Next, Steelers versus the Cardinals. Pickett goes down, which ultimately cost the Steelers. But James Conner returning to Pittsburgh. 105 yards, 2 touchdowns, taking his team over the line. Commanders versus the Dolphins. Tyreek, baby, let's go. Averaging over 30 yards per catch in that game. 2 touchdowns for him. A-Chain was back. 2 touchdowns for him as well. Second most scoring offense in the league, the Miami Dolphins. Just 4 behind the Cowboys. They hold the number 1 seed in the AFC. It's a tasty little division now. Bucs versus the Panthers, a nothing game. No words. Rams versus the Browns. Flacco in a Browns jersey, something that we thought we'd never see after we wore purple for so many years. But Stafford had a day, 280 yards, 3 TDs. And Kyrie fantasy owners were loving it when McVay put him in the end zone within the last minute of the game. Packers versus the Chiefs. Love outplayed Mahomes. How often can you say that another quarterback outplays PM himself? 3 touchdowns for him. The only shining star for the Chiefs was Pacheco. But other than that, dog game. Bengals versus the Jags. Lawrence goes down, which only cost him the game. But Browning is the guy. Absolutely, he's the guy. 32 of 37 completion. But what did he do? He got his pieces involved. 2 touchdowns for Mixon. 1 touchdown for Chase. And he had an absolute day. And what a game that was. Finishing it overtime. Superb game. And then we move to the shock of the week. One which I think, Mr. Sidhu, you are going to have great pleasure in talking about.
Let everybody know what we had going on this week.
For those of you who live under a rock, Eagles versus the Niners. Brock Purdy went off, baby. Eagles lose at home. They move to 10-2. And the NFC is now wide open, boy. There you go. 2 minute, boy.
That was great, mate. Absolutely killed it there. That's exactly what we needed to get kicking off here. And as you mentioned, What an absolute shock. We saw shocks everywhere, but definitely the biggest shock of the week. I said last week I was confident, but I was also terrified. I was terrified after I watched us go 3-and-out on the first drive and end with -2 yards after I watched the Eagles take it into the end zone. But wow, it was absolute revenge. I know the Kelsey brothers talked about the fact that it wasn't an NFC rematch or anything like that, but Deebo took it personal, as he should. And what a game. And I just think we mentioned it last week. It was down to be the game of the season. In my eyes, that you won't get a game like that where out of nowhere, blitz, all out blitz, you'd say, almost like we are. And
Bring the house.
The Niners came along and just smashed the Eagles about like nobody has been able to do this season. What about your thoughts on that game? Because I'm extremely biased, extremely happy. It would be nice to see what the NFC rivals thought about that game.
Yeah, I think I'm in quite a unique situation where I hate the Niners and I hate the Eagles. So I think I do have quite a neutral view on this for once. After the first quarter, I remember texting you, Taron, saying Brock Purdy does not look settled at all. He was shitting himself in the pocket. Finishing the first quarter with -6 yards of total offense. He was crap. Like, let's not get about it. The Niners were rubbish in that first quarter. But why was that? It's because, and I don't like saying it after this week of people calling for Purdy to be the MVP, but it's because Purdy had the ball. What changed for him in the second quarter? What changed in the second half of the game? They gave the ball to the talented players on offense. They did those passes that were behind the line of scrimmage. They gave the ball to McCaffrey, and that's ultimately what opened the game up for Brock Purdy. He did have a fantastic game, but that first quarter for me showed what his flaws are. And what he does do well, he does absolutely superbly. But I think that the coaching staff at San Francisco facilitated that win rather than him himself. I saw a clip of, I don't know if you've seen it, Mahomes Mountain. That's been done. And interestingly, I really, really like the analogy that they used. Think of it like you're climbing a mountain. Brock Purdy is the tourist. He's the guy that when he gets to the top of the mountain, everyone's going to hear about him. But Deebo Samuel, he's the Sherpa. He guides him up there. He makes sure he gets there safe. The unsung hero. Brock Purdy gets carried by his talents, by the talents that they have in that offensive unit. And I don't think you can disagree with me. You can't, especially when Deebo gets 2 touchdowns, 116 yards. McCaffrey gets 93 yards and a touchdown. I do feel like Brock is very, very good, but at the same time, the talents around him are excellent. Absolutely excellent.
I will agree with that. Don't get me wrong. I think, people have been talking about it, that he's a yak merchant, that, he's not valid in the stats. And I do 100% agree that the tools he has around him, that they're tools that have been there a long time and that they're established in the NFL. But I also look at the fact that they're tools, again, that have been there for a long time and that have had many quarterbacks sat behind them who haven't been able to deliver fully. The closest they came was Jimmy Garoppolo, and he was a man that wasn't far off from getting them the chip that they wanted. But, now we've got the second reincarnation of Jimmy Garoppolo and Brock Purdy. And I agree with you, that first quarter. I think the big thing for me is that first quarter seemed like Shanahan trying to figure out the Eagles' D. And I think that's why he put the ball in Brock's hands, because all of a sudden, come the second quarter, it just seemed like he understood where people were moving, the assignments, the sort of motions. And I think that was a big thing that came about, and that's a big thing people talk about, is the motions that the Niners had in that game. From people watching on the sofas like we were, you couldn't keep track of where people were bloody going. So I have no idea how the Eagles did cope with it, and they didn't, unfortunately. But I do agree, the sort of the hype around Brock Purdy, it won't get to his head because he's got his feet on the ground. He sits in the pocket, and he sits in the pocket mentally as well. But I think it's one of those things where he is fortunate enough to be in a team where all the players around him are incredible assets, some of the best in the NFL. And I think that's all we've ever needed at quarterback for 49ers, is just someone good enough, not incredible, not the best in their position, just good enough to get the job done. And I'm not going to complain, because screw the Eagles. The Niners are going to be cooking this NFC division, baby.
That is the most kind of level-headed I've ever heard you talk about Purdy, because he just is that he is good enough. He's not great, he's not elite, but he's good enough. Because in that team, it's pretty much a perfect quarterback situation.
Of course,
he's got like 3 talented people that he can throw the ball to, and probably the best running back in the league, behind the best offensive line in the league. with the best left tackle in the league, with an elite defense, there's not much better situation. There's not a better situation for a quarterback in the entire league. And when you mentioned the motioning as well, Deebo Samuel in that first quarter, he was just motioning into the backfield.
Yeah.
And I think the Eagles knew that, well, he's not going to be a blocker. He's not going to run the ball. So I think they just discarded him. And then as soon as it started, like you said, moving them out wide, kind of getting a few more different looks in, that's where the Eagles secondary was absolutely dismantled and really, really exposed. The corners couldn't handle man coverage, and the linebacking core was really, really shoddy. So shoddy, in fact, that they've gone and signed three-time All-Pro linebacker Darius Leonard from the Colts, who was waived last week from the Colts, who we mentioned. I, as a Cowboys fan, really, really wanted to pick up. But it just showed that the Eagles are so beatable, and they're not living up to that hype train that everyone was kind of riding. And when you beat them in their own backyard and they fall to 10-2 with the Cowboys coming up next at home, where the Cowboys have won, I think 14 straight games now or something like that. I can see that NFC East division going wide open, and that one seed is anyone's for the taking, to be honest with you. It's between the Niners, the Cowboys, and the Eagles. But if the Cowboys can get this win against the Eagles, they then lose 2 on the bounce. Cowboys are absolutely rolling. So we'll see what happens moving forward. But it is an exciting time for the NFC. Finally, an exciting division that we've got in our hands.
Definitely, indeed. And I think it's a big point as well. Is the Niners after the game? Nick Bosa said, "I hope the Cowboys were watching our tape, and I hope that the good enough quarterback was being watched by a flop quarterback at the Cowboys." Some would argue, and we know that he probably watched it to see how the Niners cope with the Hawks, and clearly it worked out well because the Cowboys come away with a big win against the Hawks, who out of nowhere seem to have kind of found a bit of offense against the Cowboys team, which they really haven't had this season. They get DK involved, and they got sort of all their assets involved, and all of a sudden, the Hawks put in points on the board in a game where there was no punts, which I'll let you talk a bit more about. But what a game on both sides of the ball! But seriously, this, like you said, the NFC, it is interesting this year round.
Absolutely, mate. Like you mentioned, the no punts. That's only the 6th time in NFL history where there's been no punts. That it's unprecedented. The Cowboys stopped the Seahawks twice on 4th down, forcing turnovers. And as bad as the defenses were, those offenses were absolutely electric. I mentioned DK Metcalf, and when they got the ball into his hands, he made plays. Now, the Cowboys put Metcalf one-on-one quite a lot with Deron Bland, who was covering him. And the Cowboys tend to play a lot of single high safety. And what that means is there's no help. That as soon as you get past the cornerback, there's no help behind you. So if you play 2 safeties, there's kind of a bit more help on both sides of the field. What single high means is that there's only help on one side. And when you play single high, if your corner gets beat, it's usually going to the house. And that's what we saw from DK Metcalf. I thought he was absolutely electric on the slant routes. As soon as Bland got beat, he's fantastic on the outside, but on the inside, that's sort of where his flaws are. And when he got beat, 134 yards and 3 touchdowns for Metcalf. But less about that and more about the offense. Dak Prescott, I mentioned 3 touchdowns, 299 yards, and he kind of got everyone involved. Like, we had the your fantasy shout, Jake Ferguson, who you then decided to bench for Taysom Hill for some reason.
I was busy, bro, but Taysom Hill showed up, so I'm not going to complain this week.
Not as much as Jake Ferguson, and you know that as well. But he kind of got all of his talents and all of his weapons involved. Brandon Cooks had a day. CeeDee Lamb, of course, had a day. Tony Pollard started kind of doing things for the first time in the last couple of weeks. He started showing up again, and fantasy owners are absolutely loving it. I know the fantasy owner of TP and Ali is absolutely gassed that he started cooking.
Shame he got battered though, isn't it?
Yeah, well,
we'll move on to that. Like, carry on.
But it was one of those games where, yes, the defense was bad, but I think it was what Dak needed to show the league that he can absolutely carry his way through the team. And I think that's the difference between, we mentioned Brock Purdy, but the difference between Brock Purdy and Dak Prescott is I don't think Brock Purdy can carry the team over the line, whereas we've seen Dak Prescott do that. Dak Prescott isn't behind as good of an offensive line. Yes, he's got good talents, but they're nowhere near as good as that of the Niners. And for me, I think that's why Dak Prescott's the MVP, because if you take Prescott out of that team, they crumble. If you take Brock out of that team, Sam Darnold goes in, and I think he does all right, And that's the thing. So for me, Dak is the MVP. I know he's not leading the race at the moment, but he's second in the list, tied with Jalen Hurts. So what a game, though. What did you think of it on first?
Again, it's one of those games where I couldn't believe it when I woke up. Again, a late game here in the UK, and you wake up the next morning, you look at the highlights, and you think, bloody hell, like out of nowhere, the Hawks again in our division, keeping an eye on them, but they seem to actually sort of click. And with us sort of playing Seahawks this week, and obviously you going to the Eagles, it was a game that you wanted to keep an eye on, and I think it's quite scary again to see that, like you mentioned there, almost equivalent to a British offside trap, that if a ball goes in behind and you haven't timed it right, you are screwed. And I think that's what we saw with the Seahawks. And I think it's going to be, again, another game where the Niners D is going to have to stand up like it did this week against the Eagles. And it's the same with the Cowboys D. We'll have to do even better and stand up to the Eagles D. So I think it was a good week for both of us to keep an eye on both matchups going on. And as always, a game in the NFC is a game that you have to keep an eye on because it's so tight and it's so difficult. But we'll move over to the AFC and a Chiefs team that all of a sudden, Taylor Swift being there as well is a point to mention. Taylor Swift, Travis Kelce's girlfriend, being there, and they just didn't cook as they normally do and lost to a Green Bay Packers team who have really been lukewarm as anything this season. 1 minute Jordan Love is a second reckoning of Aaron Rodgers, and he's lauded for being one of the best quarterbacks in the divisions. But next minute, he's just absolutely awful. And this week, he must have had his Weetabix and turned up against PM, Patrick Mahomes, the poster boy of the league. And what an absolute game it was.
Absolutely, mate. It was Mahomes' debut in Lambeau Field, and it was a game that he wouldn't want to remember. When you're being outplayed by Jordan Love, who's obviously coming into his third year into the league, he definitely has a point to prove. And I'll be honest, this last few weeks, he's been proving that point. He silenced his doubters. Me, I was one of them included, but now I'm full on that Green Bay hype. And do you know what? Why can't they make the playoffs? They're in a fantastic space in the division. And Love was making elite throws. He was throwing off his back foot. He was making good reads with the defense. He knew when to take off. He knew when to escape the pocket. And he just played the game so well. And he thought the offense was obviously schemed around his talents, but he just was so elite. And I think Green Bay have been lucky that if he carries on playing like this, and that's 3 franchise quarterbacks in a row that they drafted. But I just thought he was so good. And as we talk about the Chiefs, obviously, you mentioned Taylor Swift in attendance. She comes out and says that she bloody loves football. Well, we've been here longer than you have, love. So pipe down, get back at line. The shining star on that team, as I mentioned before, Isaiah Pacheco, 110 yards off just 18 carries. He's touching 6 yards per attempt there, and that was what I think kind of kept the Chiefs in the game. Like Jason Kelce was saying, or Travis Kelce, sorry, was saying that they were never really stopped on offense, but they just couldn't quite get into the end zone. Like they were quite unstoppable. Like they got down the field, but then the red zone sort of the red zone offense kind of let them down, which is something that we don't really see from the Chiefs. They're normally fantastic in the red zone. But yeah, Isaiah Pacheco kind of was the shining star in that offense, and that's what kept them in the game because Mahomes didn't, unfortunately, which is something that we're not used to seeing from 15. He's been electric since coming into the league, but in the last few weeks, he's kind of wavered a little bit, and they have regressed as a team since last season. But they are in a good spot for the playoffs. They've sit with the number 2 seed, but we'll see what happens because that AFC division, the quarterbacks are not good. They are dropping like flies at the moment. People are losing limbs left, right, and center. So if the Kansas City team can kind of start to click a little bit, then there's no reason why they can't get to a Super Bowl with the championship game played at Arrowhead. In my opinion, they are in a fantastic position. But this week, Jordan Love got it done.
Jordan Love did get it done, and I think a point that you mentioned there was loss of limbs, and I think it's something we should finish off this week's review of. By God, how many people got their leg folded, got their arms folded, got everything folded? We even saw the sideline officials getting a few bumps and bruises in there, maybe a bit more than a bruise. What is going on at the moment in the NFL when it comes to injuries? I know people talk about turf and the issues with turf, but it seems to be, a constant thing where every single week, we've seen this season multiple Achilles injuries, we've seen multiple ACL injuries, And now, we're seeing even more brutal injuries than that, where we've seen, broken legs, and the kickers for was it Tennessee, I believe, who's got absolutely folded. Is that something to do with, the grass, or is that generally just to do with how brutal some of these guys are coming and hitting? Because wow, just wow.
I'll be honest, Bo. When has grass ever broken someone's ankle? Like, people play with the
I felt a few times at Sunday Six Light. You know what I mean? Ankles, knees, everything's gone.
These are elite level stadiums, elite level pitches. I'm pretty sure that a concrete football cage in the deep dark ends of Salford is slightly worse than Lambeau Field, for example.
Over the place, everything like that.
Yeah. But for me, I just think, yes, we've had. I think we usually just get this amount of injuries. I just think that the profile of player that this injury is happening to is kind of standing out a little bit more. One thing I would say about injuries, obviously the quarterback for the Jags, Trevor Lawrence, going down. Did you see that he had to walk off the field? They didn't even have like a stretcher cart to take him off.
A cart for him, bless him.
They made him walk like 500 yards. Basically, he walked miles. He's done whatever he's done, and he
was back practicing, so clearly he wasn't that bad.
But give the man a lift. Give the man a lift. Just someone pick him up or something. I thought that was absolutely shambolic. You are one of the only 32 teams in the entire world that play this sport at an elite level, and you can't even get a stretcher to take your star man off the field. If that is a team that isn't coming to London in the next 5 years, then I don't know what is. They are moving from Jacksonville. The fans have lost faith. But I don't know. It was just, what did you think about it all?
Again, I think there needs to be a GoFundMe petition to get Trevor Lawrence a hoverboard or something, because that's the franchise QB, Mr. Prince Charming himself. He can't be hobbling off the pitch. But again, for a sprained ankle, maybe he can, because clearly he's okay. He's back practicing, and again, I think the Jags will be happy that he's not out for an extended period of time. Should we wrap up that as our week review of all the action that's been going on? Wrap it up and move on to another league that we love to talk about, Fantasy Football League, and it's a league where, as I mentioned last week, I'm tanking. I've got more and more members of the league on board with, loser of this league getting the number one pick. It's going to be signed and approved. There might be votes against it, but they will be outnumbered.
The commissioner will be voting against it. Let me tell you now, Sidhu.
The commissioner can vote, but the bottom player in the league will be getting the number one pick next year. And so, with that in mind,
No, he won't. Let's just hold it. No, he will not.
No, he will not. He will. And again, as I said, I was trying to tank this week, but it turns out I'm no good at tanking, because I managed to beat the person that I was playing against, who is sat in the consolation bracket with me. But so it was a lovely victory. But I guess that's what happened when your entire team is the Bills' offense and everything like that. But I tell you what, Alvin Kamara and Taysom Hill as a tandem duo are one of the most blessed human beings. That and Brandon Ayuk and Brock Purdy came in clutch this week to get me this win. And I'm over the moon. I'm delighted, because it's been a tough season. It's been horrible. My heart's been broken a few times with some of the decisions that have been made. But overall, tanking, I should have done it all season, because apparently I actually get good results then. So it's been a good week for me. What about yourself, Elliot?
Well, let's just talk about you a little bit more, bro. Of course, when you try and do something, it never, ever comes off. When you try and win, it doesn't come off. When you try and lose, it doesn't come off. This just cements my point, where you just pure ass, bro. You just ass at the game.
I'm amazing. I am.
What's your record?
It doesn't matter about records. It matters about dynasty. It matters about legacy. And when this league,
the first season of the league.
That's what I mean. I'm planning. I'm rebuilding. Relax, man. We'll go again next year.
Yeah, right. Of course you will. So I this week moved up to the 2 seed in fantasy. After I think I played the guy with McCaffrey this week.
You did.
And do you know what? I bloody won, and I was gassed. I was like, I think I chose the right players. I had kind of mixing. I was umming and ahhing about Chase. Ended up throwing in him at the last minute over Cortland Sutton, who I picked up off the waiver wire. But I kind of my guys just they went off. Like Sam Laporte went off.
Yeah.
Kind of Justin Herbert didn't really do anything, but other than that, every guy kind of got points other than the Cowboys defense. But I don't mind the defense disappointing me when we get a W on the board. But yeah, it was a lovely week. I play my brother this week in fantasy though in a massive game. Massive game. This game's all about seeding. We've secured fantasy playoffs for the season.
The Greenwood Bowl.
Mate, it's big, it's massive. People have talked about the Kelsey brothers. They've talked about Donna Kelsey. Well, my mum's going to be on the screen this week. She's going to be all over the media. It's massive game in our fantasy league, and you know what? I've got faith in my guys to get it done. I'm starting Devon A-Chain this week, and I've got faith that. Have you seen as well? There's been a massive trade as well, a 3-for-2 trade between your boy in your gaff and then my brother.
I've seen.
There's some flags being thrown, but because that is a shady trade, you know. Shady.
Well, wait till you see the trade that I'm slightly manufacturing. It involves a Vikings wide receiver and the number 2 and 3 running back for the number 1 running back, quite possibly on a short-term loan to see out the season. But we shall see. I'll keep that stum, but you never know.
That is massive. We can't just. That is huge. So. No way he's going to go for that. There's not a chance.
It was offered to me. So anything for CMC. Anything for CMC.
That is huge, bro. That's if you pull that off, bro, I'm all in on that dynasty.
It's only a short-term loan. It's only a short-term loan to the...
You know what happens though when you fall in love with loan players? You can't let them go. You're going to be buying him back. You know you are.
So he doesn't know what's going to happen to CMC, but I do. But we'll keep that on a quiet one in case he spends 5 minutes listening to this podcast. But we'll move on then to who we're picking then for this week's fixtures. As you mentioned, you've got the Greenwood Bowl going on. I think I'm playing the man who I'm trying to get CMC off. So hopefully I can clear that before I play him. But we'll have to see. But I think for me, it's again, there's some good players to keep your eye on. I picked up DJ Moore as a good sort of acquisition this week in a trade. I think the Bears now got some good sort of run of fixtures, and he gets a ball. Nice little player to have in the flex. So I'm happy with him. I really am happy with him. But Justin Jefferson returns. My number 2 pick returns. I could do with him playing. If not, he's getting bunged in a trade, and I'll get CMC instead. But we shall find out. Another sort of punt to go out there. Texans, Tank Dell broke my heart. Didn't even touch the ball. Broke his pretty fibula tibula. Get out of here for the season. But the Texans, looking at a Noah Brown, looking at a Nico Collins, anyone in that Texans offense, if you can get them in, there's big points to be up for grabs there.
And can I just jump in? Yeah. I have recently just cut Noah Brown, so Noah Brown is available on waivers.
I'm going to get straight onto him. I might get straight onto him because cheers for that little tip, mate. Oh, thank you. That was really kind of you. You throw me out with stride there. Oh yes, my last sort of pick to keep your eye on is a Christian Watson, I believe, of the Green Bay Packers, because their run of games is they're playing really awful defense, and they've got Carolina and God knows what else in the next run of games. And he's a man who Jordan Love likes to throw to. And I think, again, if you can get any of that Green Bay offense in there, big points, could be game-changing points. And I think there's some players to keep an eye on. What about yourself, Elliot? Who have you got your eye on? Who have you got in this week?
So for me, going forward, we're going towards the playoffs. We're looking at kind of players and teams that we're not normally going to go for, but and almost getting rid of the players who have got us to the point of the playoffs, and to kind of get the assets in who are going to score points 1 week in and then cut them for the next week. And for me, that is any defense that comes up against the New England Patriots. Because the Patriots are trash. They are 0-20 against when teams score over 20. 0-10 when teams score over 20 points, and they have conceded less than 10 points in the last 4 games, and they are 0-4. They are such a dog team. If you can get any team, so this week they're playing the Pittsburgh Steelers. If you've got the Steelers, you're laughing. You're getting 50 points because they're just so bad. Yeah. And then another player that I've actually picked up, who I dropped Noah Brown, and I picked up McBride from the Arizona Cardinals, tight end. In the last 4 weeks, he is tight end 1 in the league. And I've got Sam Laporte, so I don't think I'm going to drop him for Sam Laporte, but I don't want anyone else to get the talents that he's got. He's only been picked up in 75% of leagues. So if he's someone that's available on your waiver wire, absolutely add him. Kyler's throwing into him all the time. And with the run of fixtures that kind of the Arizona Cardinals have got, Kyler's going to need someone to throw to. And I think that man is going to be McBride at tight end. So if you can get him in your fantasy teams, for me, he's a very, very good shout.
Lovely. And I think hopefully people take our advice and hopefully get some points this week, because by the sounds of it, we're doing all right and we're helping people. And if not, then again, I don't blame them, because it's been a terrible league. It's been a rigged league. But next year we'll come back better and stronger. But we'll move on again to this week's round of fixtures. Some tough fixtures, as we've already mentioned. Some really tough matchup, but some guaranteed amazing games. Like we mentioned, the seedings are getting tight. The games are getting tougher. And I think our punts for this week are sort of big plays that we can all agree on. Now, I think the two matchups that we'll focus on is probably going to be the Philadelphia Eagles facing up against the Cowboys, and the Chiefs facing Mr. Josh Allen INT, again, back off a bye, returning to play the Bills in two games that I think could decide seedings, very much so in both divisions. So shall I kick off with the Philly and the Cowboys game? Now, again, having watched Jalen Hurts, having seen him almost limp off after getting smacked about by the 49ers defense, I did predict him last week to have over 1.5 touchdowns. But he didn't deliver. He really didn't deliver. But this Cowboys D is not as good as the 49ers D. As we've seen, they put points on the board. They put points on the board. And I can see Jalen Hurts playing angry this week. And I can see him getting over 2.5 touchdowns. That includes passing or rushing. As we know, he loves a little bum push. So either way, I think he's going to get points, and I think he's going to get over 2.5 touchdowns. Elliot, what are you saying for that game?
Are you calling for the Eagles to win that game then as well?
I am calling for the Eagles to win that game. I think they're going to come back firing, kicking. They're going to have their security man back on the sidelines as well to headbutt that Prescott. So I think the Phillies will come back and get a result.
Cowboys have not lost at home or stadium. They're not going to start this week in week 13.
First time for everything. You remember your first time, right?
Unfortunately.
Cut to the Cowboys.
But yeah, quickly moving on. So I'm obviously predicting the Cowboys to win. And obviously one man that we have talked a lot about is DP, Dak Prescott. But one of the weapons that he throws to CeeDee Lamb, I'm going to predict for him to go over 149.5 yards. So 150 yards for him total, so rushing and passing. And the Cowboys to get the job done. And that's what I see happening, boy. Where AT&T they're in Jerry World. It's going to be an absolute game. And one that I think is going to be very exciting. It's going to be back and forth. And yeah, definitely one to watch out for. And then the other game that we mentioned as well, the Bills versus the Chiefs. You mentioned that the Bills are coming off a bye. The Chiefs are coming off a loss. In Arrowhead, you mentioned Mr. INT himself, Josh Allen, but I have a bold prediction. Bills are going to win that game, and Mr. Josh Allen is going to have over 3.5 total touchdowns. That man is going to show up. He always does against the Chiefs, so fingers crossed for me. He does this week. What have you got for yourself, Taryn?
Well, again, they're two games which we've already mentioned are going to be very interesting. But a good thing and a bad thing is that the Cowboys game is at stupid o'clock in the morning for us Brits. So we might have to catch up with that one. But the Chiefs-Bills game is on the Sunday. It's a 9 o'clock one. So we can watch that and then get up into bed afterwards. And as you mentioned there, the Bills, they could cook. But I sort of think that the Chiefs, again, it's going to be a week of comebacks for me. And I think the Chiefs are going to come back strong. I think Mahomes is going to come out throwing. But I also think a man that you mentioned earlier, Mr. Pacheco, is going to come back stampeding into that red zone. And I think he's going to get under 1.5 touchdowns, just to be safe. Okay, right. We'll go over then. We'll go over 1.5 touchdowns, just so I don't upset you. I will agree. I think he's going to get some yards. I think he's going to be in and around that red zone. As we mentioned, the struggles they had last week, I think they're just going to want to punch it in with him this week. And I see the Chiefs taking that and coming away with a big win in that game.
Do you know how boring taking the under is as well? Do you know how boring that actually is? I could literally go Dak Prescott to get under 9.5 touchdowns. And I would just get it. So you are actually the most boring man.
Stop getting upset. Have a breather, mate. Look, all that matters is that after last week's punts that we had, I've managed to make it a competitive game. I was down 3-1. I'm now back up to a 1 point deficit in 5-4. So you're currently leading 5 points to my 4. But after this week, I think I'll be back in the lead. So don't hate the player, hate the game, but also hate the player as well, because I can understand how upset you are.
Bro, it's the most points you've got all season. 4 is your personal best for the season. In terms of fantasy, bro, you need to just kind of wake up to the fact that I am going to win this. What are we actually calling it? These punts. What are we calling it?
Just, I don't know. The Punt Pricks Trophy. We'll go with that.
Yeah. Is there going to be a trophy celebration as well?
Yeah, you can have an open top bus parade if you win.
Thank you, mate.
Perfect.
I look
forward
to
the podcast and all the listeners that we have listened to this podcast. Now, moving on to our sideline question that we like to go to every single week to wrap up all of the entertaining conversations that we've been having this week. And I tell you what, Elliot, we sound more and more American as a podcast go by. I think we're losing our identity as All Out Brits. We might have to change it to All Out Alabama. I don't know. We really are becoming more and more American. I'd argue.
Maybe not Alabama, bro. I don't know what you've heard about Alabama, but what you do in your own time is completely up to you. You are from Brum,
Let
so
the tide roll, bro. Let the tide roll. But we'll move to our sideline question. After a week where we mentioned there's been a few altercations, a few scuffles, and a few ejections as well. And we saw in the 49ers-Eagles game, we had a big Eagles chief security, I believe his name's Dom, coming over, getting involved in a scrap and getting my beloved Greenlaw ejected from the game and also getting himself ejected from the game. But I respected the fact that he was ready for a fight on the site. So if that were the case for our sideline question this week, if that occurred to you and you needed some personal protection on an evening, which NFL player would you choose to be your bodyguard for an evening, as shown by our lovely new graphic?
He's clean. He's so
clean,
clean.
upgrading, getting better. Would you like to kick us off with your decision, Elliot?
I've mentioned this person in the podcast so far, so I want to see if you can guess it to start with. So this man, Taron, he's a big cunt. He's massive. There's a few videos went out in pre-season of him, and that man can jump. He can do everything. He's absolutely loaded. He's got 6-pack abs. He's massive. Their mans can do filthy things. So have you got a guess for me, Talon?
I'm going to go with Nick Bosa.
No. That was miles off. What about DK Metcalf of the Seattle Seahawks?
He's confusing.
Huge, bro. He's scary to watch on TV. Like that. If I'm going on a night out, and we've seen how some of our night outs go, sometimes we do need a bit of help. We do need support from the weapons that we've got around us. And when I've been in an altercation, you've been an absolute weapon. And we've had some people who've been more wet wipes than weapons, but that man will be an absolute weapon to have by my side. When I'm in a club and someone's barging into me, when all I want to do is have a boogie. Do you know what I mean, boy? That's all I want to do. Have a bit of fun.
I do agree with you, mate.
What about yourself?
I think that's a valid selection because, again, he's a mad geezer, and he's definitely someone who you would not want to mess around with. I'm quite torn with this one. The man who I was going to pick, his name has forever slipped my mind when I needed him to. But all I know is that he's a rusher. He's a pass rusher for the Dolphins. I believe his name's Jordan something. I can't remember.
Jordan,
I don't know. But he's the one that always makes the funny comments on.
Is it Jordan Allen?
George Wilkins, something like that.
Well,
anyways, I like him because you know what? He'd make people laugh. He'd also just go, "Why are you touching me? It's not fair." And then he'd headbutt him. So I'd take him as my personal bodyguard, or alternatively, I'd go for a man who actually terrifies the hell out of me, and that is Chase Young. I don't know what it is. I've looked at him, and I don't know if it's his hair. I don't know what it is, but he just scares me, bro. Every time I see him on the sidelines, I'm like, does he play for us? Are you sure? He's scary, man. So, I wouldn't speak to him. I'd just leave him behind me to come off the edge and just batter anyone that came in. But I am built like a Greek god. I am an absolute shit house, so I will not need any protection. So don't need to worry about that.
I think you're more shit than house, mate. I'll be honest with you.
Well, as always, we bring the house every single week. So, someone's got to bring it. And I'll take responsibility for that. And I definitely think that we brung the house this week for this wonderful podcast. As always, Elliot, thank you very much for your time in a week where we've had a lot to talk about. And as I mentioned, I think we're becoming more and more American by the week. If you're listening and you are American, please do let us know if we are. If not, then we'll change our passport and we'll get over there. If that's not the case, then we'll just sit with it.
You're trying to create, trying to get an infinity gauntlet of passports at this point, aren't you? That's all you're trying to do, bro.
It's a siege mentality, mate. It's gathering hunter mentality. Someone's got to do it. It's part of the genes. Just, it's one of those things. But it's also one of those things that makes this podcast as amazing as it is. And we thank everyone who's been listening. We thank everyone who's been supporting us. Please make sure to like, comment, and subscribe on our YouTube. And if you are unable to watch our beautiful faces and you don't like the look of the man that we have at QB2 over here, then please do listen to us on Spotify instead. Thank you, everyone. And we shall see you next time as we send you back for more, as always, on this podcast. We see you next week on the All Out Brits podcast.
Thanks for listening. See you.